Welcome back to another episode of my least favorite Sega Genesis games. In part 1 we looked at such terrible games as Batman Forever, Back to the Future 3, and the absolutely unforgettably bad Dark Castle. In part 2 here I have 10 more Genesis games that I absolutely can't stand. These games have elements that really make them difficult to play, much less enjoy. The worst part about many of these is that they are hidden behind popular IPs that may trick you into thinking they just had to be good games. Instead, you were lured into spending your hard-earned money on a dud and your young and innocent mind traumatized forever. I know some of you often watch my videos with your children, but I advise some discretion in this one. I'm gonna be harsh on a few of these games and we may see the occurrence of the odd swear word here and there. It's rather easy to get fired up when talking about a game that you wasted your time and money on, especially when some of them were published by Sega themselves. Let's waste no more time and get right to it, my least favorite Sega Genesis games Part 2. Growing up in the 90s, I of course knew about Captain Planet and the Planeteers. It was an animated show about a group of kids that could use their powers to stop evildoers from destroying the Earth. When things got too tough, they could call Captain Planet to do the heavy lifting. Unfortunately, in this piss-poor Mega Drive effort released in 1993, you were stuck as the kids for 80% of the game. At the start, you get the choice of which kid to play as, each with various tasks to complete their levels. Some of them simply need to destroy certain machines to move on, others have to search for things like valves to shut off. There is a boss fight at the end of each stage, and once you get to the 5th and final level, you play as Captain Planet himself. Unfortunately, I have never seen the dude because playing this shitfest of a game grows tiresome quickly. The gameplay is functional enough, but the level design is just awful. A few stages are so short and simple they're over in minutes, while others are massive, sprawling areas that you easily get lost in. The graphics all look the same too, so landmarks to guide you are few and far between. Hit detection is poor, and the jumping mechanic has a funky delay to it that feels imprecise. Then there are the ear-shattering sound effects. Holy hell, man, you think you know bad gym sound? Think again. The sound effects here will have you reaching for the volume control in mere seconds. The game has a few difficulty settings that range from making it really hard to making it a cakewalk, so little kids may find some appeal here. It was done by Nova Logic for Sega, the same company that did the truly abysmal Blackfire on the Sega Saturn. This was not officially released in the US. One of the most peculiar licenses on the Genesis was 1994's The Incredible Crash Dummies. Flying Edge published it, who of course is just a claim, and it of course turned out to be as bad as you expected. Grey Matter developed it, the team behind Wayne's World on the Genesis and the Crow City of Angels on the Saturn. I mean, I could stop right there and not say another word and you should know the kind of shit stain you have on your hands. The mere concept of the gameplay here is infuriating. The developers basically said, let's take our gameplay, which isn't fun or well executed, and make it even worse by causing the player to lose body parts as you take damage. So as you run and jump through this mess, things are falling on you every few inches, enemies come out of nowhere, and the stage design is a convoluted mess. Best part was, though, is as you struggled with the floaty and slippery platforming, you also got to do it without arms and legs, taking an already sad experience and making you not want to even play it. The visuals aren't bad, but the music and sound effects suck to high heaven, so there's little here to motivate you to see more than a stage or two. There were some bad fighting games released during the booming days of Street Fighter II and its spin-offs, but few could compete with the bland and poorly executed Rise of the Robots released in 1995. It starts out promising enough. The CD-like intro looks amazing and sets the game up potentially as having some incredible animation with the 32 megabit cart size. You can let those dreams die quickly, however, because you are immediately thrust into a fighting engine that is just plain broken. No coherent combo system to speak of, hit detection seems random, and every damn move is just a sped up version from weak to strong. Best part is that as you get your ass whooped trying to learn it, a death sends you back to the title screen. That's right, newcomers, be prepared to play the first 2 or 3 guys about 10 times before you find that one move to spam the hell out of and finally see the end. Some folks like to commend the graphics, but I think those look like shit too. It lacks any sort of real artistic flair, and most of what's on screen is sterile and colorless. Acclaim could release some bad stuff, but this thing deserves a class action so every customer could see a full refund. I truly do feel for you if it was a gift for you when you were a kid. I have spoken ill of FANTASIA in the past, and I'll do so here again to make sure as many people as possible avoid this turd originally published in 1991. After Sega released Castle of Illusion, I was expecting another decent Mickey game in this one, but it really fell short of my expectations. Most of the problems begin with the gameplay, which has sort of an animation lag that makes sudden moves quite difficult. That basically means until you learn every enemy placement and platforming segment, death will come frequently and without mercy. But the developers decided to take the frustration a little further by putting in garbage like multiple exit points that can actually lead you back to repeating a stage. I mean, if there ever was a despicable practice to make your game artificially long, that's it. The sad part is that there's actually some killer visuals here. I love some of the later stage graphics, and if it had the proper gameplay along with it, it really could have been special. Sega yanked this one on Disney's request because they didn't want anything using the FANTASIA license. That didn't help its appeal any, and it remains one of Sega's most epic 16-bit disappointments. Time Killers was originally an arcade game that got a late-in-life port to the Genesis in 1996. Having heard about its dubious quality, I avoided it and stuck to my Saturn and PlayStation games. Many years later, I sat down to finally play it, and good lord were the reviews of the time accurate. This is truly a bad fighting game, perhaps even worse than Rise of the Robots by a good measure. The graphics are genuinely no better than a Master System title, and the sound is considerably worse. Gameplay amounts to little more than hopping back and forth, looking for that one move that connects 80% of the time so you can survive the otherwise horrific mechanics. I have always felt that bad games rarely live up to their mythic billing, but Time Killers definitely earns its criticism and then some. It sits among the worst on the Genesis, easily giving Slaughter Sport, Sword of Sodan, and Dark Castle a run for their money. I'm sure some of you found some delight in its blood and gore, and I'm sure the developer Black Pearl Software thought it'd be enough to sell a few copies. But relying on such an incredibly weak gimmick to sell a poorly developed piece of software almost always ends badly. This one was no exception. As someone who admired the late Robin Williams, it hurts me to add this one to the list, but Toys was just an awful game on the Genesis. Released in 1993 and based on the film of the same name, you are a toy maker out to stop your uncle from turning your products into weapons of war. Played from an overhead perspective, the entire game is basically you wandering around looking for cameras to smash. Of course, wandering around with no ability to jump or do much of anything other than use your crappy weapons, which are mostly out of your direct control, quickly grows tiresome. But it's the cluttered enemies and constant barrage of weapon fire that takes this one to new extremes of tedium. Hits come from nowhere and many of them you can't see coming. Because your own attacks lack any real effectiveness or fun factor, you are basically running for your life in every stage. There are supposed to be side-scrolling levels later on, but I've never seen them because I grow tired of this unbelievably fast. Once you top on the bland graphics and awful gems music and sound effects, it's one you'll want to skip, even if you love the original Robin Williams performance. Sometimes a game just seems to hit all the right areas for being a must-own. When Sega published Instruments of Chaos starring young Indiana Jones in 1993, I had visions of a Castlevania-like execution with bold, beautiful graphics and a soundtrack worthy of the movies. Somebody should have been there to smack my dumbass back down to reality, because we of course got nothing of the kind. There isn't anything here to put in the plus column. The animation is funky, the gameplay is slow and unresponsive, and it sounds like someone is dropping a deuce while you're playing it. Because I love the license so, I tried to like it. I really did. This wasn't a game I simply turned off after the first level and said to hell with it. I gave it my all, but the absurdity of the gameplay wore heavy to the point of hatred. There are enemies you can shoot 100 times and not kill. There are platforms you can fall through and die. The animation is so laggy it causes attacks and jumps to come out half a second after you press the button. Replaying this here for the capture reminded me of all the reasons why I came to hate this back then. It's a poor effort start to finish, and a game I can honestly say has nothing redeeming about it. Sega publishing stuff like this was a detriment to the Genesis brand, and a reminder that Western software could be truly awful in the 90s. Not being a fan of Aerosmith, I suppose I was biased against Revolution X from the beginning. The thing is, the arcade game did have its merits. Two-player co-op gunplay with some nifty sprite scaling was enough to earn it some respect, but the Genesis version here has little of the arcade's appeal. The sound and visuals are cut back to the point of being a completely different game. Gone are the scaling environments, replaced with side-scrolling levels that repeat to the point of wanting to turn it off after 10 minutes or so. And that really is where the game falters the worst. The repetition is just unreal. Shooting the same bad guys that take too long to kill while you take mandatory damage just isn't fun. The arcade version was pay to win too, but you expect a bit more in substance from a home game. Take away the sound and visuals though, and what's left here is nothing worth playing on your laziest day. Acclaim was again involved in this mess, and it should come as no surprise to many of you. This was late 1995, and the Genesis had many better games for you to play. Some games you just want to be good because of the pedigree of the other games in the series. When Robocop 3 showed up in 1993, it kinda reminded me of the original arcade game in the ads, so I was hoping for the best. No such luck with this one. While it remains a simple run and gun with some platforming elements, the simple graphics and horrendous enemy design really punish any chance of you enjoying it. Enemies are of the touch you and your damaged variety, and even go a step further by continuing taking life if you don't move fast enough. Most of the challenge is simply surviving the onslaught of enemies at the end of the stages. Battles that can often end as quickly as they start unless you have lightning fast fingers or a turbo controller. You'll also be terrorized by off-screen damage here repeatedly, a frustration that gets worse as the game gets harder. Robocop can die by falling too, if you can believe it, despite him taking a dive off the OCP building in the second movie. This is just too slow, too cheap, and too ugly to do the license any real justice. If you want a proper Robocop video game on the Genesis, fire up Robocop vs. Terminator and have a blast. As it stands here, only the Matt Furniss soundtrack is worth a damn. Every video game has a certain level of repetition. It's unavoidable, and it's the gameplay hook and how well it's executed that tempers that repetition to enjoyable levels. But 1992's Toxic Crusaders wallows in its repetition to the point where you are just begging for the stages to finally end. It's a beat 'em up, but the tiny 4 megabit cartridge was used poorly, resulting in seeing the same enemies constantly and some pretty uninspired graphics and sound. You have a choice of a few different characters to use, but they all amount to the same end result in combat. And man, is that combat super cheap. You can be juggled for multiple hits, resulting in crazy damage. Stuff is constantly falling on you, crushing you, or flying around you, pelting you with damage. The gameplay isn't tight enough to deal with it all, and you spend most of your time running from enemies as opposed to mounting an effective offense. The Master System visuals and gem soundtrack add insult to injury, yet somehow Sega of America found it within their judgment to publish it. Some of the folks involved in this were also the ones that did FANTASIA, making it no surprise at all to veterans that suffered its gameplay. The dictionary defines the word bad as of poor or inferior quality, defective, deficient, and I certainly feel all of these games apply. While I have no doubt that some of you likely played enough of these to find some kind of enjoyment in them, I unfortunately cannot say the same. I've always been the kind of guy that has believed that if a video game doesn't sit right with you when you first play it, you don't owe that game any more of your time. It doesn't matter if it gets better later on or improves with you becoming more acclimated with its mechanics. If it doesn't appeal to you, that's just the way it is. Some games immediately put you off by the way it looks or sounds, and sometimes the gameplay just doesn't feel right. Conversely, I do happen to believe that there is no such thing as an objectively bad game. Someone somewhere has enjoyed even the most hated video games and held them in high regard. You can boil it down to taste or personal opinion if you want, but art has a strange way of manipulating us in all sorts of directions. You can take two gamers who like mostly the same stuff, only to have them disagree sternly on the sound, graphics, and gameplay of a hotly contested piece of software. I think that really makes episodes like this interesting. For me, I lay my soul bare telling you how much I dislike these games. I mean, I wouldn't piss on any of these if they were on fire. But I also really enjoy seeing the comments from those of you that have radically different opinions. I've always kind of loved that about video game related entertainment. Seeing opinions that reinforce my own is cool and all, but it's hearing from those of you that go in a completely different direction that's truly interesting. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.